Hello everyone, this is part 2 of looking at the strands of conservatism. So hopefully you've done all of those summary sheets that I set last week. This is really just applying some examples to those strands so we can kind of help illustrate what we've learned. And you're going to be reading a few articles. So the first strand was traditional conservatism. Before you move on, just make a little mind map of what you can remember. So try not to look at your notes. Pause the video, spend 2 to 3 minutes just jotting down everything you can remember. So traditional conservatives believe in conserving tried and tested institutions. So our obvious example here is the monarchy. The wisdom and experience of the past are important, and any changes should preserve the best elements of that institution. So you can see how the monarchy has evolved over the years, but also you can link it to the House of Lords. So the House of Lords is a tried and tested institution, but it has had minor adjustment and reform that we obviously learnt about in the last unit, so the reduction of hereditary peers, but it's a slow change to preserve that institution. So another example, Sir John Cass. So we know that there's Sir John Cass School up the road. Sir John Cass was a philanthropist who founded a school in East London to educate impoverished children. So that was sort of the origins of the school. The foundation still exists today and actually helps to fund the school and the work it does. So you can see how this links to that idea of noblesse oblige, the nobles in society helping the poorest. So sometimes you might have heard police officers being called bobbies or peelers. The reason for this is because the person who established the Metropolitan Police was called Robert Peel, and he influenced the creation of similar forces across the country. So this links to the traditional conservative approach to law and order, being tough on law and order and making sure that society is secure. Next, do exactly the same thing. Pause the video here, spend 2 to 3 minutes mind mapping what you remember about the one nation conservative approach. What is different about that compared to the traditional conservative approach? So some examples. So firstly, I've got here Ken Clarke, who is a conservative politician. He used to be Home Secretary. He was also Chancellor. But this headline here, prison system failing to tackle reoffending. Justice Secretary to unveil plans to reduce 60% plus reoffending rates for short-term prisoners through the rehabilitation revolution. So this again shows an approach to law and order that, yes, is tough because it's, using prison systems, custodial sentencing, but also is looking out for those, it's recognizing that those who are perhaps more likely to be in prison are at the greatest need. And so it's, again, linking that idea of noblesse oblige, actually supporting the least advantaged. You can link it to the 1874 Factory Act. This led to a 10-hour working day, so a reduction for workers, and that was Disraeli. And lastly, you can link it to David Cameron's Hug a Hoodie campaign. So it was the softening of an approach to young offenders and those that perhaps were marginalised by society. So again, it's trying to support those that are most in need. It's funny because when he was elected, it suddenly disappeared. There were no hugging of hoodies when he was Prime Minister. So have a look at this article. What I'd like you to do is take 2 colours and highlight the information. One that shows Cameron is a one nation conservative, and the other side that he is not. If you can't highlight on your computer, then just use a table. So make a table of arguments for and against. That would be fine. You can just copy and paste the sections into the table. It's worth noting here that when looking at politicians and applying examples, rarely do people fall very neatly into one category or another. There will be, if you take David Cameron, for example, there will be examples of him being a one nation or being influenced by one nation conservatism, but also examples of him being influenced by the new right. So these are ideas or ideologies. Rarely does someone fit exactly into or neatly into that one box. They might be influenced by more than one idea. So the third approach, so the new right, remember there are two branches to this approach, the neoliberal branch and the neoconservative branch. Again, pause, make a mind map of what you can recall. So the first example we can see here is Theresa May pledges to push on with cuts to corporation tax. So Britain's corporation tax of 19% is already lowest in the G7 industrialised Western economies, and the Conservatives have promised to cut it to 17% in 2020. In the EU, only Ireland has a lower headline rate. So you can see here, removing those barriers to business. So corporation tax is a barrier because obviously they're having to pay more tax rather than use that for profits or reinvestment into their business. So you can see that that's an example of sort of laissez-faire economics, which is typical of the neoliberal stance. Secondly, you can talk about Thatcher and how she weakened trade unions by outlawing unions from engaging in political action, allowing employers to sack and selectively redeploy workers, and sequestering union assets if they broke industrial laws. So weakening, remember, trade unions are there to protect workers and support workers and their rights. So by weakening those, it means that businesses have more scope to use employees how they want to, and that can sometimes mean that it's at the detriment of the worker and at the advantage of the business. So again, that's very typical of a sort of laissez-faire approach, and the rolling back of the state from the economy. So I've got another article here. Similarly, if you can't highlight, make a table. But here I'd like you to look at the information that explains how neoliberal economic policy is leading to growing inequality. Just make a list, I guess, if you can't highlight. So the second branch, the neoconservative branch, again, pause, mind map what you can remember about this branch. So the first example, the Met Chief defends fourfold rise in use of stop and search. So neoconservatives would agree with this, and they would seek to maintain law and order. They take a tough stance with the strong state that is authoritarian. And you can see that with David Cameron. He, advocated life means life sentences for the most serious crimes. So he advocated perhaps 100-year prison sentences to ensure that somebody spends their whole life in prison. So that's an example of where punishment should be a hard lesson for the offender. And neoconservatives tend to side with the victim over the perpetrator. So they're not looking at the reasons why someone might be more likely to commit a crime, and actually, they've perhaps had a disadvantage to start in life, and that's led them to or forced them to commit criminal acts. They're instead siding with the victim of the crime. Brexiteers are arguably neoconservative, as they are suspicious of institutions that weaken the nation state and create social fragmentation. So remember, neoconservatism is all about trying to create social solidarity and a sharing of the same norms and values. And arguably the EU weakens the nation state. It weakens our government's ability to create laws, because as we know, all our laws, when we were members of the EU, had to comply with EU law. And arguably, Brexiteers would argue that the EU created social fragmentation because it allowed people from other countries in EU member states to come and live and work in the UK, and that led to a breakdown of British society. So they are all examples of things that link to the ideas we've been looking at, and you can use them in an essay, but it's not the pure focus. Remember, it's the key thinkers that are the focus, and we'll be looking at those next. Once you've typed up your notes, just send them over by Friday. Thanks very much. Take care. Bye.